All right, it's about 1:01 and we know that an hour goes real fast. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks so much for joining us today for Education to Employment Data for California Industry webinar. I'm Zima Creason. I'm the Executive Director of the California EDGE Coalition. EDGE is a statewide policy and advocacy organization. We unite business, labor, social justice, education, and workforce development organizations. And we work together to address the skilled workforce shortage, create pathways to the middle class with a real eye on economic mobility for Californians that have been historically left out of the state's prosperity. This event is being brought to you in partnership with the California Competes team and our sponsors, which I have to send a huge thank you to. So Unite LA, Small Business Majority, Workforce and Economic Development, a program of the California Labor Federation. As we will hear today, there is significant traction and activity related to the Cradle to Career data system. And it is imperative that industry be aware of the system and be engaged in its development. Assembly Member Irwin's AB 99, if passed, will implement California's first statewide longitudinal data system, which will integrate education, financial aid, social service, and workforce data into a secure system. AB 99 will be heard next week on April 7th in the Assembly Education Committee. Also, the governor has proposed $18 million in investment to fund the data system. So again, there is a lot of movement, a lot of traction, and we're really excited to share some details with all of you. So let's go ahead and dive in. We have a fabulous moderator and amazing panelists ready to share their perspectives and expertise with you. Joining us today is Sujin Jez, Executive Director of the California Competes, and she will be moderating our session today. Kathy Booth with WestEd, John Brower with the California Labor Federation, and also Vice President of the California EDGE Coalition. Bianca Bloomquist, California Small Business Majority, and David Rattray should be joining us any minute. I can't see my screen, with Unite LA. And now I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Sujin Jez.
Thank you, Zima. Before we begin, some housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and we will be sharing Kathy's slides along with the recording after the webinar. Please use the Q&A function to ask questions at any point during the webinar, but especially during the Q&A period towards the end. And we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. So we'll begin this webinar hearing from Kathy Booth, who will share the background of the Cradle to Career data system, its purpose, and an update on where things are with workforce training and employment data. And then we will move to a moderated panel with the expert panelists that Zima just mentioned, and we'll wrap up with a Q&A with all the participants here today. So let me take a moment and introduce Kathy Booth. So Kathy Booth, as a part of WestEd's post-secondary pathways and career mobility team, leads projects that help translate data into action. She helps map data across systems, including crosswalking K-12 and community college offerings, tracing adult education pathways from K-12 to community college, documenting education pathways to employment, and aligning data from educational institutions and social service agencies that support workforce development. Ms. Booth currently serves as the process facilitator for developing the California Cradle to Career data system. And I want to say that that title does not give enough credit for the hard work that Kathy has been doing on that and has just been leading the way and making sure that all the voices get heard and we build towards developing, I feel like, an amazing system. And I really appreciate your work on that. So back to my notes on the bio. Kathy also serves as Associate Director for the California Guided Pathways Project and conducts research with the Community College Research Center on how colleges have integrated career and transfer partnerships into pathway reforms. For over 5 years, Ms. Booth was the project manager and architect for Launchboard, a suite of online data dashboards that make data on student progress, completion, employment, and earnings available to educators for the purpose of program improvement. Kathy's also previously served as Executive Director of the Research and Planning Group for the California Community Colleges. There, she helped lead activities such as developing the Career and Technical Education Outcomes Survey, expanding research on using high school data to inform placement into basic skills courses, investigating employment outcomes for short-term training, and documenting effective approaches for supporting students. And without further ado, I will turn over this Zoom to Kathy.
Thank you so much, Sujan. And I'm really thrilled to get to speak to all of you today. As you can tell from my bio, I'm a big believer in the partnerships between workforce and education to help many Californians get to their goals in living wage jobs. So I'm going to share my screen so that I can put our presentation up. All right. So what I want to do today is just give you some basic information about what the Cradle to Career data system is and the status of the planning currently. So as you probably know, we have a problem in California, which is that while we have some really valuable information that's been collected about students, about the social services that are delivered, about employment and earnings for Californians, all of this information is in different places, and it's very difficult to put together, which is a real challenge. And I think there's nothing like this past year to make clear why it is so important that we look at things like educational attainment in context. So the health setting, the level of unemployment, something like a global pandemic definitely impacts what happens to students. And it would help us understand better how we need to evolve our systems as the needs of our employers change. Importantly, not only do we need to put this information together so researchers can look at it, we need to make this information broadly available in a form that would actually be useful to employers or to families as they're making plans about how they should be building additional skills that are really going to enable them to do meaningful work. So we're very lucky in that this is a problem that is well known, and many organizations, including those that sponsored this webinar, have been really pushing for California to do what most other states have done, which is to link their data sets together and make that information available so that we can better plan for the future. So in 2019, our legislature enacted the Cradle to Career Data System Act, which laid out a very comprehensive list of activities that needed to be done over an 18-month period to basically recommend how it is California could link not just education data together. So we're not just talking about making sure we understand whether high school students go to college, but really looking holistically by looking at whether they're accessing social services, and very importantly, whether they are making it into the job market, and if so, what kind of jobs are they getting? How much money are they earning? And does that enable them to support themselves and their families? So this is the process that my team has been helping to lead, and there are 30 of us at Wested that help make it happen. So I'm just the tip of the iceberg. One of the things to know about this planning process is that it has been extraordinarily comprehensive. So the precedent for this was set in the legislation, which had 16 partner entities representing pretty much the whole spectrum of agencies in California that look at education. So we've got representatives for early learning and care and K-12, all flavors of post-secondary, including independent and private colleges, education-related entities that help give us context, like those that provide financial aid or do the credentials for teachers. We have two different representations related to employment and workforce training, so we both can understand employment outcomes, and then other types of trainings that students might go through, like apprenticeship. We've got social service agencies, and then data experts. But importantly, this planning process was also expanded to include as many people who would be potential users of the data as possible. So we have multiple advisory groups and subcommittees that are looking at various facets of how you would implement a data system and make it usable. So all told, we've had more than 200 people involved in the planning process to date. So this is generally how the planning went forward. In the beginning, we had to get all on the same page about what the data system was going to provide. There's a tremendous amount of pent-up demand in the state. There's a lot of people who want information. So at the beginning, we went out and we interviewed various stakeholders and we said, well, what does Cradle to Career mean to you? And the responses that we got were incredibly broad. So some people would say, oh, this is going to be an analytical data set for researchers. And other people would say, oh, this is going to be like Yelp, where you can figure out where childcare is in your neighborhood. So obviously we had to spend some time reconciling those different visions for what the data system could provide. So that took us about 4 months, but we were able to get down to a really clear set of products, which I'll describe in just a little bit. So once we were clear about the scope of the data system, we were able to begin to flesh out how it would be implemented. So we started with the basics, vision and mission statements, making sure we understood how generally we were going to connect data and make sure that we were respecting privacy and all laws that protect individual identities. Then we figured out where we were going to put the data system, and the work group recommended an entity called the Government Operations Agency, or GovOps. This is a neutral entity within state government that has a lot of experience supporting other agencies directly related to things like the technology experts in the state. So just an excellent place to get this data system up and off the ground. Work was done to create a governance structure to make sure that there'd be strong public input into how the data system is developed and evolved, as well as the appropriate expertise for the data providers. And then we figured out how that information would get out into the public. So we looked at the content of the data points that would be available, and I'll talk more about those in a moment, as well as how researchers would request data for approved projects. Then from that, we were able to create a preliminary report to the legislature that we produced at the end of December. So all of this is up on our website, and I'll send you the link so you can go on and read it yourself. That December report represents the bulk of the types of information that the legislation asked the work group to answer for how things would move forward. So for the remaining 6 months of the process, what we're really doing is we're fleshing out various components that will be important for implementation. For example, the templates for the legal agreements, or we just finished a set of recommendations that get very nitty-gritty about the security and privacy policies to make sure that individual data stays safe. We've also been working on things like data definitions. How are we going to define all the different ways that we look at race and ethnicity, for example, as well as, importantly, what we can do to make sure that we're educating the public about the availability of the tools and how they can use them in a practical manner. So whenever I'm giving this presentation, one of the first questions that comes up in the Q&A is people are really excited and they want to know, when is this thing going to be around for them to use? So as I mentioned, we put in their legislative report in December, which sort of laid out what the data system would be. Then the governor responded by both putting forward the amount of money that was recommended by the work group, which is about $18 million for the first year. In addition to that, there was a trailer bill that was released, which aligns directly with the recommendations that the work group developed. As you heard, there's also AB 99. So we've got a lot of different parties that are really eager to help make this data system a reality. So provided all goes well and the data system is funded and authorized in July of this year, looking at other states, it generally takes about a year to get all the information loaded in, linked, and make sure that it's in really good shape. So it may be summer of next year before we're able to put out some of those public-facing tools. But we're going to be able to move pretty quickly relative to other states because so much of the planning that's been done is the kind of thing that normally slows down data system development. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to be really efficient at getting the data system developed. So let's talk a little bit more about what it is that the data system is meant to be. So this is our vision and mission statement. And what I want to call attention to about these two statements is that, first of all, the work group is envisioning something that is a neutral provider of reliable information. So this is sort of going to be like the data store that you could go to as a one-stop shop to rapidly go and find out information about the arc of students' experiences, starting from early learning and care and moving on through all the stages of education. So one of the things that's really unique about this data system is that there's an understanding at the outset that the pathway from education to career is not a straight line, and that there's sort of an iterative process that people may go through where they may go back to education, they may take alternative routes like workforce training, and this data system is intended to make it possible to have that information get integrated. It also really is trying to make sure that that data is actionable. So rather than just putting something up there because it might be interesting, really thinking about if someone took a look at this, would they be able to understand what was happening? And would they understand that the actions that they could take that would enable them to get to the goals or to see their community attain the potential that they're hoping for? You'll also note that there's a very strong focus on equity, really wanting to make sure that everybody has a chance to thrive. And that there's an understanding that data gets used by different people in different ways. So the way a researcher might want information may not be the same way that my high school sophomore might want information as she's thinking about career and college opportunities. So for this reason, there's really three components to the data system. So I'm going to give you a quick overview and then talk a little bit in more depth about examples of these. So one suite of resources are all focused on those things that researchers and planners or policymakers want to know, which is a way to get access to information and combine it in ways to answer basic questions about what's happening to students writ large over periods of time, comparisons across various populations or contexts with a variety of ways to get to that information. So those are our analytical tools. The second bucket is operational tools. So these are things that are designed for students, families, teachers, and counselors. So they're things that individuals could look at to understand their own trajectory, where they are now and how they're going to get to their goals. So these are things like things that help with college and career planning, or making sure you know if you're taking the right courses to be eligible for UC, being able to share the types of learning you've done through all sorts of transcripts. So not just coursework, but also non-traditional artifacts like a certification that you might have that would be important for anyone who's looking at competency-based education, especially for workers that are going back to retraining. And then the third area is focused on support, ways to make sure that people understand the information that's there and how they can use it, and making sure that there's a strong feedback mechanism to make sure that data truly is useful and of high quality. So let's just talk a little bit about some of the tangible things that are going to come out of this set of tools. So here's two examples for students. One is that we're going to make it possible that when you are applying to college, you can authorize that data gets shared about your social service history or eligibility, so that you'd be able to find out about all the resources that should be available to you that makes it more feasible to go to college and stay in college when looking at the total costs. So for example, a foster youth could say, hey, you can check this particular state source. You'll know I'm a foster youth, and then you can let me know about all the financial aid packages that you've set up for foster youth at your campus. For college students, as I mentioned, you could, if you're going from one school to another, or you've been working for a while and you want to go back to school, you can share your history for all the courses you've taken, all the degrees and certificates you've earned, including those third-party credentials that might help you quickly retrain for a new job. One of the reasons that this is really important to employers, I think, is that we really need a lot more information about what's happened to people during the pandemic. So one of the dangers of having information in silos is that our California Department of Education will be able to provide a lot of helpful information about what happened as all schools went online, and what happened about who was able to make progress if they had, for example, really bad internet connectivity. Those types of issues can get answered by individual agencies. But we don't really know what happened to the class of 2020. We don't know where they enrolled. We don't know whether they persisted. We do have really important information coming from colleges that college enrollment is way down, especially for young first-generation students. So having this data set will help us better understand what's happening to populations like that class of 2020, so that we can do a better job of serving them and recovering. And this is really important because even before the pandemic, as you probably know, California was not producing enough college graduates. We need people with higher level skills in order to fulfill the jobs that we need to stay strong as an economy. So having a variety of ways that educators can make sure that they're helping students understand that college is for them, how to get there, how to stay enrolled, how to be successful, and then how that relates to the workforce will help a lot for improving those pipelines. And really, we all know that the path from your education to a job is not a straight line. So as we understand how things fit together, social service, job retraining, employment, we'll be able to plan more effectively. So as I mentioned, there'll be college and career planning tools. There'll be great tools for college counselors so they can figure out where students are in completing their A to G requirements. If they've applied for financial aid, we'll be doing help to make sure that that data is really high quality at the local level, so students get credit for the courses that they've taken. And then we're going to have a whole suite of dashboards that'll have really simple infographics that answer key questions about those critical junctures as people move from cradle to career. So we can figure out, where did those K-12 students apply? Who is eligible for financial aid but didn't apply for it? When students go to a four-year institution from a community college, do they get a bachelor's degree? How much money do they earn? So lots of useful information. In addition to dashboards, you'll be able to drill into a query builder tool where you can drag and drop from 200 elements to figure out whatever it is that you would like to know the most about out of all those different variables. And all of this is designed to make sure that privacy and neutrality are protected with the highest level standards related to security so that you know that individual data will stay secure. So all the specifics are here on our website. I've put a little arrow there so you can see it's the recommendations page where you're probably going to want to go because that's where all the final recommendations are, but there's also a ton of information about the process. So that's a very quick overview. I'm sure that you'll want to dive in through the panelist discussion and Q&A.
Thank you so much for that, Kathy. That background and that update are so useful. I see that we've already have some questions popping up, and we will circle back to those at the end when we get to the participant questions. Now I invite our 3 esteemed guest panelists to turn on their videos for us to begin our discussion. Great. Thank you. So I will take a moment and introduce each of our panelists, and then we'll jump into the discussion. So first, I'd like to introduce Bianca Bloomquist, who's the Senior California Policy and Engagement Manager and Northern California Outreach Manager. In this role, she manages Small Business Majority's outreach and education efforts for the Bay Area and Northern California region, developing relationships with business organizations and small business owners to empower the voice of small businesses. And she also works with the California Director on national and statewide policy efforts. Prior to joining Small Business Majority, Ms. Bloomquist served as a legislative aide on Capitol Hill for a member of the House Financial Services Committee and as a legislative representative handling federal healthcare, transportation, and workforce issues. She's also previously campaigned in Southern California and Wisconsin on both state and national policy issues affecting working families. Next, we have David Rattray, who is the president and CEO of Unite LA. Since 1998, he has led Unite LA in ensuring the continuous improvement of effective and aligned cradle to career public education and workforce development systems in Los Angeles, resulting in all children and youth having access to a high quality education. Previously, Mr. Rattray spent more than 20 years in the food service distribution industry. Mr. Rattray serves on the LA City Workforce Development Board and Youth Council and was vice chair of the State Workforce Investment Board's Lifelong Learning Committee. He's also the chair of the board of directors for the Linked Learning Alliance. Mr. Rattray earned his MBA from USC. And last but not least, we have John Brower, who's the executive director of the Workforce and Economic Development Program of the California Labor Federation. The California Labor Federation's affiliates represent over 2 million California workers. The purpose of the Workforce and Economic Development Program is to serve as an intermediary and a resource for unions in responding to economic and labor market changes. As such, the program serves as labor's resource in California for building effective workforce and economic development systems that create high-wage jobs, economic opportunity, new partnerships, and stronger communities. Mr. Brower also serves as a governor's appointee to the State Workforce Investment Board, the executive committee of the EDGE Coalition, and as a board member of Tradeswomen, Inc. Prior to his last 2.5 years as Workforce and Economic Development Director, Mr. Brower served for 11 years as the executive director of the Workforce Collaborative, a nonprofit in Oakland providing workforce development services to low-income East Bay residents. The Workforce Collaborative participated with labor unions, employers, community colleges, adult education programs, and other community-based organizations and sector initiatives in the construction trades and transportation and logistics. Thank you 3 for being here and answering our questions on this important topic. So I have 2 questions that will go to each of you, and then I have 1 question specific to each of you and your role in your organizations. First, I would like to pose to all of you, can you first share a little bit about why and how the data system is important to you and your work with your constituents? Great. So I will, I guess, throw that out maybe to Bianca first, since it looks like you are not muted.
I thank you so much for that question. I mean, first, I would just like to say that it has been so invigorating over the course of 2020 to see so many individuals and agencies and organizations, research, education, I mean, you name it, all come together to design essentially this system. I'm really excited for it. I mean, I think that investing in our workforce will help to level the playing field ultimately for small business owners. So for folks that aren't familiar, my organization, Small Business Majority, is a 501c3. We're a nonprofit. We advocate for small business owners here in California, as well as nationwide. We have approximately 80,000 small business owners in our network that we engage with and elevate their voices so that policymakers can effectively craft public policy solutions that address the needs that they're facing. And workforce is one of them. So that might explain a little bit about why I'm here to advocate for the small business owners that stand to benefit from these kinds of investments. So we're thrilled about this potential. As Kathy had said, you know, California is one of the only states that doesn't have a system, but I am aware that I believe that this will be one of the best. And so we're excited to track the student to career or student to entrepreneur progress across these educational systems.
Great, thank you. There is a perk to being one of the last, as we do get to learn from everyone else's, I guess, strengths and challenges. Who would love to answer this next question next?
I'll go next, if that's all right, David. And hello, by the way. Hello, everyone. From the California labor movement, I think there's a couple of things for us that are of interest. We feel like we represent both part of the demand side in terms of workforce development and as well as the supply side. We have obviously signatory employers in every sector of the California economy, and in many, if not all of those, we have various forms of labor management training partnerships, apprenticeship programs, higher road training partnerships with other community stakeholders. And for us, this data system is a way, hopefully, to enhance those partnerships, frankly, moving forward, and being able to lift up over time, identifying barriers and addressing those barriers that our employers and our unions may have to getting workers coming into their industries and being adaptable, frankly, or being ready as changes are taking place in the California economy and in individual sectors. And then on the supply side, again, those partnerships and pathways, helping to build a quality supply side. We have, like I think everybody else here, a real interest and belief and see a need to address equity and inequality across race and gender and vulnerable populations in California. And this data system is a way to really see what's working and what's not from our end. I think beyond that, we also feel like this data system, as a start, you know, Kathy's talked about things like addressing living wage attainment and other things like that are job quality. If you have not read, you should read the Future Work Commission's report. Job quality is a major focus of that in it. And for our end, part of that job quality equity equation, frankly, is worker voice, and including whether folks have the right to bargain. So all of these, the beginnings and the extensive nature of this data system, I think, is a way for all of us to really look at the investments and see how they're translating out, both for employers in the economy, but also for workers.
Thank you.
So
David?
Jen, you want me to go?
Yes.
So nice to be here with everyone. And as always, thank you, Kathy. You always do such a great job of laying this out. I represent both the business community, but a broader cross-section of all stakeholders, including labor and education and government. And for many, many years, over a decade, the constituents we've dealt with looked at what Florida did over a decade ago with envy and thought, why can't California understand what happens between infants and toddlers and then across K-12 and higher ed and the workforce. And we all knew that the only way you did it is you had to connect the data systems together. It was so obvious, and yet not easy, of course. And so we just been waiting for over a decade for this, to be honest. All my stakeholders kind of think it's a duh thing. Like, what do you mean? You have to even ask us why we need this? It's so obvious. It feels like if you're driving the Cradle to Career system in California, you have a dashboard, but your window is blacked out. You can't see where you're going. You have no idea. I mean, we just don't know where we're going. And we have no idea when we make strategic decisions about where to invest money on early care and preschool and K-12 and in different programs and targeted for different students. We have no way to understand what happens long-term. We have short-term measures, but we have no long-term measures. So, I mean, it's sort of to our constituents, it's a duh question. Of course we need it. So we just can't wait, and we're ready to support the heck out of it.
Great. And, Kathy just shared with us that, a part of, it's Cradle to Career, and there'll be workforce and employment data in the data system. I would love to hear your takes on what data would you find most useful, and how would that advance, your business, your industry, the constituents that you represent. David, do you want to jump in first?
I'm happy to go first. We watch, I mean, like John does, we're in the talent development, talent thriving business. So we're trying to make sure that companies have the talent they need and workers get the jobs they want. Without a good data system, the way the employers express demand to the education system is on this transactional level. We either hire you or we don't hire you. And higher ed wants to know, like, what occupations are in demand and how do we shape our pathways to be what the employers want. If we don't do a good job of expressing what that is, why would we expect higher ed in education overall to know what they need to train and educate for? So to us, one of the biggest things is this connection between education and post education. So we need to make sure that there is good data about how did your graduates do after they came to us, and how are they succeeding over time, so that the post-secondary and the whole Cradle to Career system can have a clearer picture themselves of what's happening in labor markets today and what's likely to happen tomorrow, so they can shape education more effectively, so that it's good for the student, the graduate, and the company.
Thank you. Maybe I'll just go in the sort of reverse order. John, if you don't mind going second again, what data would you find most useful, and how would that advance labor in California?
Yeah, I think in agreement with what David had to say, I think some of this is, one piece of this that I was really intrigued in reading the report is around the idea that the career counseling aspect of this, of really, I'm actually also wearing my dad hat of having 6 kids who are in their 20s and a 30-year-old at this point, so who have figured it out by and large. But this idea of both students and parents and others being able to sort of identify and give some real career counseling possibilities in the long term. And I hope that comes out of this, to be honest with you, is actually a greater investment in the career counseling professional development and for the K-12 and community college and some of the other stakeholders, whether that's supportive services or whomever in the equation, frankly. I also, in the long term, I hope that there's a link to this, to some of the things that the state articulates as big initiatives going forward. You know, we have this governor and the previous governor who have invested a lot in fighting climate change. And what is that going to mean? You know, what is going to happen relative to healthcare and workforce in an immigrant community, you know, other populations in California, same in manufacturing. So we've got a lot of different initiatives that the state takes on that don't always seem to have a relationship then back to particularly education and workforce systems, except in kind of siloed kind of ways. And it may be one way to do that. The other is we increasingly are seeing different either industry valued certificates and credentials or other things than just the AA or the BA. And I'm hoping that this system is a way to be able for job seekers and for the system to capture those kind of industry valued certificates or micro badges or whatever gets created to see if they in fact have real value and are leading to success or not. So those are some of the things that I think are going to be interesting kind of going forward.
Yeah, if I may jump in, I mean, just from what John was saying there, I'm hoping that this system will provide an opportunity for our small business owners to play a role in these efforts. I mean, it's I don't need to tell anybody here, small business owners don't have dedicated HR departments. You know, they don't have training budgets. They don't have enough people to hire to you know, scale and get out of those silos that folks are talking about. So I think, you know, organizing multiple companies, small employers within the industry or across industries or by region will provide a really amazing opportunity for small business owners to weigh in on what they need, because, you know, having small employers with vacant positions and a pool of workers that are not the right fit for the job is also a big small issue. I mean, small employers simply can't compete that way. And I'd love in a few minutes, I don't think it's the right time now, but I'd love to share some polling with you all about the exact role that small employers play in the workforce space when it comes to equity issues and hiring those folks in their community and hiring those folks that look like them.
Thank you. It's great to hear. I feel like both from, you know, the student and the worker perspective on the use to be able to see what the labor market looks like for them and to make informed decisions, but also for employers to likewise know what does their labor pool look like, and for them to be able to make informed decisions about hiring and probably locations and, you know, their business strategy. And the operational tools too. You know, at California Competes, where a research works, we think a lot about the analytical tools. So it's also, I feel like, I love hearing about the use of the operational tools to make good decisions. And I feel like also as a former faculty member, when our students would ask about, you know, career options, you know, many faculty, myself included, had not been in a traditional labor market. So, you know, having someone to be able to guide students and data to be able to guide students would be really, really powerful. Thank you for that. So now I have one question for each of you, more directly related to your organization, your role. To Bianca, given small business majority, you know, has a national perspective in addition to the California focused one. I was wondering if you could talk about what you've seen nationally with regards to education and employment data, and how that has been leveraged by small businesses and entrepreneurs.
Sure. I mean, I suppose it's now or never. We're at 1:40. I would love to share the polling data with you all, if you don't mind. One piece of our work that makes small business majority unique, especially on a national level, is that we engage in third-party independent polling and data of small business owners nationwide. And we, in a recent poll, and I'm happy to share the link with you all after, there was a notable pattern of small business owners or businesses owned by people of color employing more people of color. People of color make up, and I'm reading the data points here because I don't want to get it wrong, but people of color make up at least half of the staff for 55% of diverse business owners, and only 40% of business owners of color have a workforce that comprises 50% or fewer employees of color. All this to say, folks hire folks that look like them. And the true, and it's also true for women. Women also employ more women than men do. 70% of men have a workforce that's less than half female, while only 52% of women do. And 25% of women employ 75 to 100% women, while only 4% of men do the same. And so the role of small business owners in this piece nationwide, I think is clear here. So yeah, on a national front, I mean, I don't want to just throw statistics at you. Folks know that nationwide, the United States spends less than other advanced economies on training our workforce, on its training efforts for those folks who are unemployed. Experiencing job displacement, and as regions like California cope with really rapid changes in technology. I think someone earlier mentioned a report that came out. These skills are going to need the data to back them up in order to put policies that help these individuals. And this is true both in California and nationwide. We're really excited, though, about the American Jobs Plan that President Biden has committed to investing in. It's really exciting to see the huge amounts of investments that are going to be made on a national level. Because there are many folks on this call, but the small business piece that we're most excited for is the $300 billion investment in American manufacturing. This will prioritize the building of small business owners to be part of that revitalization, and we expect a lot of the work that comes out of these conversations and the convenings to play a significant role in making that possible, as well as $100 billion in workforce training. And this is the same figure that the National Skills Coalition and other groups have been calling for, which we're really excited. I've been talking for a minute. I'll go ahead and step back.
No, that's great. I feel like the conversations around sort of the national perspective and federal policy, oftentimes in California, because we're so large, we get short shrift. So I appreciate that perspective and thinking about, like, I think the big questions are like, what's the most effective way to leverage the relief that's coming? These are many times empirical questions that having a great data system would help us understand what's the best way to move forward. I know we're wrapping up, so I want to make sure we have time for Q&A. I do have another question for David and John, so let's jump into those and then we'll get to the Q&A. So John, as a labor leader and a workforce expert in California, how do you see the data system supporting industry workforce development needs? Maybe if there's like a specific example or sort of challenge that you've been thinking about recently.
Well, I think for us, supporting high-road training partnerships, many along the lines, the example that the State Workforce Board has initiated now, almost a couple dozen various high-road training partnerships in transportation and healthcare, public agencies, a wide variety. One of the findings of that the Future Work Commission from the governor said that while the probability of low-wage employment is reduced by 33% with a college degree, it's actually reduced by 39% if they're a union member. And so frankly, part of where the labor movement is going to be pushing is at least the transparency within the outcomes of various investments that the state is making as to whether unions are involved or not in those partnership and workforce and education partnerships. Because I think overall, we all want to maximize the investments that the state is making and the best practices in it. So that from our perspective, those are some of the things I think we hope we'll see over time in relationship to this.
Thank you. And I wonder what makes a high road job a high road job, and then thinking about the overlap with regards to union employment. So are there things that
It's in short, it meets industry demand, employers and labor. It's worker focused. It's also got a community dividend. and it's outcome-based, of which Kathy is answering that. So those are the elements of a high road partnership.
Thank you.
Principal.
So last questions for our expert panelists. David, one of the objectives of the data system is to allow the state to, as we've been talking about, more effectively target spending and investments in programming. Given your various leadership roles, can you speak a little bit more to the importance and value of having a data system to inform strategic decision making? I don't know if there's perhaps a specific example that you've been thinking about lately.
Sure, I'll give a few. One is, like, I'll say, a strategic initiative that a governor or the legislature launches. We don't really know a lot of times to how well it worked out and whether it should be extended or expanded. I'll give an example of the Career Pathways Trust Fund. I had the honor working closely with the Senate Pro Tem, Darrell Steinberg, to generate that. We spent $500 million, but we spent almost nothing on the evaluation. We did have a small evaluation budget, but it was just micro. And we have no longitudinal data system. So we don't really know what worked in that. And so we have no way to gauge, was that a successful initiative? And should we do more stuff like it? Or what pieces worked and what pieces worked less? Another thing I would just say is, inevitably, our economy has expansions and contractions. And so when we go through a contraction like we did in 2008, we did this past year, we don't have good data to make decisions about where the cuts should be made and what are opportunities for re-engineering, so that if we make cuts, at least they have least negative effect. Or when we have expansions and we have substantial additional money, which we're actually going to have this spring, surprisingly to all of us, we're going to be awash in tens of billions of dollars between the federal stuff and the state doing better than we think. But we don't have much data to figure out, like, how to ration that money. Where should it go? Where is the best place to invest it? The last thing I'll just say is, in order to build confidence in the public to spend even more money on Cradle to Career, which is what we believe in, United Way advocates for increasing investments for infants and toddlers all the way through to post-secondary and workforce training. But the only way for the public to say yes to more taxes or yes to supporting public funding is they have to have confidence in the system. And without a good longitudinal data system, it's hard to make the case to the public long-term to build and sustain investments in our public education system and our overall education system. So the last thing I would just say is, there needs to be a strategic relationship between the elected officials and all of us that work, in support of the system, and the voters, to be able to say, this is why you ought to, agree to tax yourself more and support the system around you.
Well, thank you all for providing such insightful responses to these questions. I will now turn it back over to Zima to facilitate the audience Q&A. So if you haven't already, for folks listening in, please submit your questions, and we are excited to address them.
Thank you, Sujin, and what a wonderful panel, and Kathy Booth. I mean, man, that was a lot of information, what I would call a power hour. So let's close it out with some Q&A. I know that there have been some questions submitted throughout the presentation, and it looks like Kathy has been on it responding. Kathy, would you mind just sharing your responses to those questions with the attendees?
Absolutely. So one of the first questions we got was, how is the data system created to the California College Guidance Initiative? So that sometimes goes by the acronym CCGI, is a nonprofit. And what it does is it administers a state-funded program called californiacolleges.edu. So when I was mentioning some of those operational tools, that is actually what californiacolleges.edu provides. And the recommendation of the work group is to take that existing effective state resource and scale it for everybody. Right now, each individual local education agency has to pay to participate. But according to the proposal from the work group, it would be freely available to all K-12 institutions in the state. So what that entails is, it means there's curriculum and college and career planning tools that start when people are in middle school to figure out who they are, what they're interested in, what they might want to do, understand in grade specific ways, what are the appropriate things for them to be evaluating, what is the difference between a community college and a four-year institution, where would I go if I want to study engineering in particular. So it gives all that information. And then in addition to that, it has tools that a school can use to figure out if the student's on target. So did they take the right courses that are required to go to UC if they want to be an engineer? It makes it really easy for counselors to say, oh, it looks like you're a little bit off course. Here's a couple of easy steps to get yourself back on track. It also allows the school to monitor whether that student has successfully applied for financial aid, which is a tricky process, especially if you're looking for federal aid, where they are in their college application so they can jump in and provide help as needed. It also makes it much easier for the CSU and UC to sort of know who's coming toward them. It helps make all that process really simple. It has electronic transcripts so that we get accurate records that get passed with a click of a button rather than having to go and get stuff from paper. We all know, for any of us who had seniors during the pandemic, what a nightmare that was. And then they work directly with agencies, local agencies, to make sure their data is in good shape, because there's unfortunately some really, it's so unfortunate, there are data entry errors that are causing students to be rejected from college because of a keystroke problem in data entry, and they go and identify those problems and fix them. So that is how that relates. The next question was about contract education. So contract education is a way that usually community colleges, but sometimes workforce programs, can provide custom training that employers design. Unfortunately, that is not going to be in the early phases of the Cradle to Career data system. So it's important to remember that Cradle to Career will only link data that already exist and are of high quality. So while there are some federally funded programs where there's some data about contract education, it's not currently put together in any of the state agencies in a comprehensive manner. However, there is going to be a robust process for people to weigh in. So Bianca was saying earlier how small business needs to be at the table. There'll be mechanisms where if, for example, understanding how that contracted training works for small providers that can't necessarily do it on their own, looking at ways to leverage state programs, they could give input saying this data set needs to be in the data system. This is how we would use it, which would then make it possible for the data system to be expanded over time to include those additional points. And there's actually a specific point about 4 years into implementation where the work group wants to do a really strategic overhaul of all of the workforce related and employment related items once they've got all the plumbing worked out to make sure there'd be that opportunity for expansion. Same for third-party credentials. Right now, we don't have solid data on that statewide, but that would be a high priority item for inclusion maybe around year 4. See, it looks like the other questions were about the PowerPoint, which I will share back out so that it can be sent out and posted. And then there's a question that asks when the data will be available. So again, Cradle to Career doesn't exist yet. It has to make it through the legislative process. So the legislature has to be convinced that this is a worthwhile investment. And if they do, then the data system should come into being this summer, and it will probably be about a year before the data is put into the public domain, because again, we need to get it loaded. We need to make sure it's of really high quality before we're sharing it out.
Thanks, Kathy. And I'm getting a couple of questions from the chat. Sorry, just my screen just did a weird thing. No tech issues until right now, right? So sorry, friends. So pretty much
I do see a question about special education students.
Yeah, how will it impact students receiving special education services?
Right. So
in regard to meaningful long-term employment. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So what'll be really great about the data system is that you can start from various points in time. So you can start with early learning and care, you can start with K-12, you can start at post-secondary, and you can see the interrelationship between school and work. So there are data points that are specialized related to being in special education. So basically the framing that was used by the work group is for students with a disability, and that there are services that are being provided by either the early learning and care provider, by K-12, or by post-secondary. So that is one of the disaggregation options. So you can choose students that were receiving services and you can understand what their longer term outcomes are. For example, you could see, are they more or less likely to graduate? Are they more or less likely to go into particular fields of study? Are they more or less likely to go to particular industries of employment? Are they more or less likely to make a living wage? So there'll be a lot of ways that you can understand over time if those students are experiencing different outcomes than other students. And again, all of this is protected, so you're never going to be able to find an individual student. So if you're worried that your student is somehow going to be found in a public data set, that's never going to happen, because they're not even going to show you anything unless there's at least 30 people in that group. So you would never have to worry about your own children's data being released inappropriately.
So important. And you know, timing's great. I think that's all of our questions for today. As the bill and the budget item moves forward, there will be opportunities for you to weigh in and engage in advocacy efforts. So let's keep this conversation going. Earlier, I shared social media and email links to keep in contact with EDGE. I believe our partners, California Competes, has done the same. I invite our panelists and partners to also put in any contact information that you would like to. You know, thank you so much, everyone that joined us today. We had a wonderful turnout. There's a lot moving very fast, so let's keep talking. Thank you so much to our sponsors and to our panelists. This session, again, was recorded and it will be available after today. So have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye-bye now.